civil war, the LTT versus the Sri Lankan army, the separatists versus the Sri Lankan army. We also had a southern insurrection of the JVP. We had the Indian peacekeeping force with their boots on the ground. So we had 3 wars happening and abundance of dead bodies. And if you were writing a thriller, you'd perhaps say there's way too many plots here. But I was sort of just describing what I remember of '89. But so they said, yeah, the politics is confusing. Also, the afterlife is confusing. What is this demons and yakas and hungry ghosts and pretas and all of that? So initially, when I finally found a publisher, Sort of Books, a small indie publisher who I knew before because Natanya Jans, who I owe everything to, really. She's a Sri Lankan who lived in London, but she said, I think the book's got potential, but it needs a lot of work. So the first task was to make it accessible. And I think this is something writing in the subcontinent. When you initially write, I didn't have any illusions that anyone would be interested in a left-arm Chinaman bowler who played in 1985. But I was interested in it, and I thought maybe people from this part of the world might be. But then I think you need to, for me, the measure of a book is not how many copies it sells or how many awards it gets shortlisted for. I think if you write the book and a stranger on the other side of the planet can pick it up and have an experience with it. For me, that's the measure. And even with Chinaman, if you notice, the first 50 pages have a lot of cricket diagrams explaining what a bat and a ball and leg spin and off spin is. And so I thought, okay, fair enough. We don't need to alienate readers. Let's do that. But also the pandemic was going on. So Natanya said, well, it's not going to come out in 2020, perhaps 2021. So we have another 9 months. Let's look at the ending, which is a bit confusing. And it's a terrific book, but the beginning is also a bit muddled, and the middle has a lot of digressions. But apart from that, it's great. Let's work on that. And we ended up doing some intensive surgery on it. And then 2021 comes along, and it's like, we're not going to publish this year. Let's look at this subplot. Let's look at these characters. Maali Almeida's not very likable. Can we make him more likable? And I'm not sure he's even that likable in the final version. But I think if you have an editor and a writer and an abundance of time, you'll end up tinkering with the things. So after 2 years, it's the same book. It's the same DNA as Chats with the Dead. But I think it would have been disingenuous to publish it under the same title. So we gave it a new title and this lovely new cover. And I think, this will be the definitive version. Chats with the Dead exists, it's circulating around, but I think it'll be phased out. So whoever's got a signed copy, hold on to that. It'll be worth something on eBay. But one thing, when someone gets you to change your copy as an advertising guide, you die a little bit. You think it's done, and then it comes back with these red marks. And once you've sulked and you've got over yourself, you do realize that if I revise it, I sulked, yeah. The pandemic, what else to do? There are all the unread books in your house, and so I was reading books and sulking. But I also was aware that when you have a proper, a talented editor who knows what they're doing, what I knew was every edit, it got better. So, little things like these 50 pages could be 20 pages. And you do the work and you realize, okay, the book's tighter, it's pacier and all that. So I'm grateful for it, and I think this version, obviously the hard work paid off.
Yes, and how. It is absolutely an incredible read, and I'm also programming this festival, but it just held me, and I had to leave everything for some time and sit with the book and get through it in one go, because it was, to use that old saw, unputdownable. I'll come back to the ghosts, but like Chinaman was about this cricketer who had disappeared, this book is about ghosts, but it is so deeply political. And we are at a time when if someone looks back objectively at the past, takes no sides, and tells a story which is not motivated, they're not looked upon kindly. So what were the reactions? You said there has been no reconciliation, there has been closure. So how was this book received initially in Sri Lanka?
So I think the central theme of the book, and themes, I don't start with a theme, I start with a plot. This was a dead guy trying to solve their murder in 7 days. so the themes come with the rewrites, but I think the dominant theme here is a question that Sri Lanka is grappling with and has grappled with, is how do we deal with our past? Do we bury it and forget about it, or do we dig it up and scrutinize it and make sense of it? And even, it's quite overt in the whole Maali Almeida story. He's got these two spirits who are pushing him in different directions.
It's like a morality play at some level.
Yeah, so Dr. Rani, that character is saying, well, your life is done, you have 7 days, make your peace, move into the light, and forget about what happened. Whereas there's Sena Patirana, who's this sort of JVP Marxist activist, who's saying, no, that's exactly what they want you to think. The karma is just the ruling class of the mystic realms trying to impose their nonsense on you and make you forget all the horrible things that happen. And Sena Patirana says, no, we need to be the agents of karma, and we need to go and get justice where we didn't get justice when we were living. And so this idea that we need to dig up the past versus we need to just let it go. And so that's in the book, but also in Sri Lanka I see it. And if you ask about the reaction, I mean, predominantly this happened in October during the height of the the power economic crisis. So people were we're grateful for victories. We won the Asia Cup, the T20, and in the midst of and we beat Australia in the one-day series. It was quite bizarre because you're going through 14-hour power cuts, whereas there's 3 matches being played in floodlights and packed stadium, and people are having a good time, but also you talk to people and they're saying, well, you know, at least we can celebrate this victory, but when we go back home, we got to walk all the way home and go back home to darkness. So I think there was that euphoria when it won. And also, books weren't available in Sri Lanka for the month of October because books are not essential services when you don't have gas and petrol. So when it finally came, and I guess it's been a couple of months now and it's been read, and I'd say, you know, 90% has been positive. There's always going to be trolls, and the trolls are always peddling the same thing that when a Sri Lankan filmmaker who makes films about the war gets recognized maybe in Cannes or Venice, the same allegation. Why are you bringing up 83? Why are you bringing up 89? This is ancient history. By bringing it up, you're doing the service of the NGOs and the diaspora and the LTT, and why are you doing this? So there has been that sort of reaction, but I think predominantly people are, you know, they're happy that Sri Lanka's won at something, and also I'm really moved and touched by a lot of young people who were born in the 90s and after that, who are reading this and who are going back and, look, the reality, I mean, this book has talking ghosts and talking animals and demons, but I didn't make up the essential background. The real story is far more gruesome than anything in the book. And I think I do see young people going back and talking about 83 and 89. And collective amnesia is something that the subcontinent seems to be plagued with. And 89 and 83, it's my lifetime, but it seems ancient history. And even if you take a recent example, the Easter attacks of 2019, there were many narratives and conspiracy theories about what happened and why it happened and who benefited. But again, no one's talking about that now because now we have to focus on 2022, 2023, and the catastrophes that are facing us now. So we seem to like go through this trauma and then just sweep it under the rug and move on. And for those who can, it's a privilege and convenient, but there are people in the country who cannot move on, people who have lost family members who are seeking answers. So I don't know if this forgetting and burying the past works for us. So let's see how this debate continues and whether we are able to even look at 2022, look what led us to this stage, and make sure that we understand it and we don't repeat the mistakes.
So that is the political background, and I'll come back to the real characters who do. I mean, when I was reading it, Rani, the Francis de Soisa is how we
Richard de Soisa.
Richard de Soisa is. They were all real characters. So let me ask you: is that so? This book would read very differently in Sri Lanka, where these are familiar characters. So the reactions you were getting at home would be very different from the reactions you're getting in the West, where it's essentially a ghost story with a love story at the core and a deeply political backdrop. So all these characters, when you were researching, did you reach out to their families? Did they know you were writing these books, this book, their stories?
So I began with, and even the first book, mixing fact and fiction is a fun thing. And in the first book, you had cricketers like Hashan Mahanama, Arjuna Ranatunga, and all that. And um, with cricket, it's sort of harmless that you're mixing, real cricket matches and inserting Pradeep Matthew in there. With this, so I looked at 89 because I was thinking about this year, 2012, 2013, and the obvious place to go would have been 2009, the final phase of the war where 30, 40,000 civilians died, and still there was the battle of the documentaries on Facebook. One side saying the killing fields, the other side saying, well, the tigers used them as human shields, so it's not our fault. But I didn't want to write about that period, so I went to 89. And there were a lot of unsolved murders, a lot of victims of that conflict. And I guess I went for the obvious. Richard de Soisa was, a Colombo middle-class, English-speaking. He wasn't a war photographer. I guess he moved further from Maali, Almeida, but he was activist and a theater person. And his death, when he was murdered in 89, that really put a chill through the whole Colombo bubble, because usually when journalists and activists get killed, it's either Sinhala or Tamil-speaking journalist in the north or the east or the south. So one of us got killed, and this meant that the death squads could come for anyone. And Richard de Soisa's story has been told many times, and so there was abundance of research. The other one was Dr. Rajni Thiranagama, who was a Tamil moderate in Jaffna, a professor who was killed by the tigers and that's the other thing. I mean, with all these, they start with worthy causes, all these movements, but then they end up becoming fascisms and getting rid of the moderates. And I think the tragedy of the 90s was we lost a whole generation of leaders. If you look at all the assassinations of the political class, also of the Tamil moderate voices. So I looked at these two characters in particular, and I began with them, but someone told me, either you should write a proper biography or you should write fiction. And I think both characters evolved from there, but I spoke with people who knew Richard, who knew Rajini. I didn't reach out to the families because, I didn't know what I was doing, and this could go either way. But since it was, and I think because it took so long to write Dr. Rani, I don't think is any resemblance to Rajini Thiranagama, nor do I think Maali Almeida has much, apart from them being a closet gay man who was murdered at that time. They're very different characters. But since it came out, Dr. Rajini's daughters, who were 8 and 10 when she was murdered, they tweeted about the fact that it was quite moving for them to see their mother represented in fiction, and that Dr. Rani is just like their mother was just as bossy and so on, which is stuff that I couldn't have known, but that was, for me, the best feedback. And it was, I reached out to them, but like I say, it could have, when you put real characters in fiction, you don't know if you're going to offend people, but this worked out okay.
Super, it really worked out okay, and just to give you a taste of how okay it went, why don't you read a bit?
We had a worthless 100 rupee note, but you replaced it with a 5 rupee note, which is probably worth more than a Sri Lankan 100 rupee note. So I'll read a...
Mike, are you good?
No, I'm good. I'll read this passage. So we can talk about the afterlife and the rules of the afterlife. So one of the rules of the afterlife, and I made many rules.
So this whole architecture of the afterlife as a place and the code of rules, how much of it is some kind of local folklore, and how much of it is what you've thought of?
I borrowed from a lot of sources. So I went to the religious texts. I went to the philosophers. I read a lot of near-death experiences, which they all talk about the light, sort of walking into the light and having this guiding figure there. But in the end, you can't interview a ghost. You can't really go there and have a look for yourself. So you have to make it up. And this idea that the afterlife is a bureaucracy where Because I think we have this misconception that when you breathe your last, when you close your eyes for the last time, you open them again, all will be revealed. The universe will unfurl itself at your feet and all the answers will be given, which is convenient, but for me it made more sense that you wake up and you got a piece of paper in your hand saying, go over to that counter and get it stamped, and that counter, God has gone to lunch for the last millennia, so you have to come back and take a number and wait. And this idea that spirits are waiting to get their visa into the light, but they have to go through this bureaucracy, that made sense to me. And I built certain things.
Who told you about the ear checks?
The ear checks. So, you'd like to say that it all came in one go, but this is again, while I was just problem solving. The ear checks, I started looking at people's ears because we don't look at each other's ears, and we can't see our own ears, but each ear is different, and I'm hypothesizing that it's as different as a fingerprint. But the idea that in your ears are hidden all the secrets of your previous life, that was one thing. So yeah, you get your paper stamped, you get your ears checked, make sure you haven't got any sins that you're taking forward, and so on. But the basic rules of the because I went to haunted houses, watched horror movies, talked to clairvoyants. I never met a ghost, and I'm thankful for that. And I don't particularly want to, but it seemed like, okay, what's it like to be a ghost? Can you go anywhere you like? And so then these rules I came up with was, one, you can only go where your body has been, which is why you only see ghosts in cemeteries or in the houses that they lived in. But the other thing and that you can travel with the wind, because I was writing a lot of this at 3 in the morning, and suddenly the door would slam and you'd look behind your shoulder and wonder who told you, where did that last sentence come from? Did someone whisper in your ear? But I think the most convenient rule was that you can go wherever your name is spoken. And this was good for a murder mystery, because wherever the name Maali Almeida was spoken, our character could go there and investigate. But also I think it had a more profound meaning that you die a second death when the last person on earth remembers you, which is why many ghosts don't survive more than 3 generations. And so I think this is Maali Almeida hearing his name spoken and traveling around. Also, it's got a bit of cultural appropriation here. I've appropriated Arthur C. Clarke, but we can discuss that later. This is called Say My Name. You want to ask the universe what everyone else wants to ask the universe. Why are we born? Why do we die? Why anything has to be? And all the universe has to say in reply is, I don't know, asshole, stop asking. The afterlife is as confusing as the before death. The in-between is as arbitrary as the down there. So we make up stories because we're afraid of the dark. The wind brings your name and you follow it through air and concrete and steel. You move on breezes through a slave island alley and you hear the whispers in every doorway. Almeida, Malinda. Then the wind blows through busy Dehivala streets and you hear more voices. JVP activist, Maali Almeida, missing. From Slave Island to Dehivala in one breath, faster than a helicopter ride. At least death frees you from Gaul Road traffic, Parliament Road drivers, and checkpoints on every street. You ride past the faces of oblivious people ambling through Colombo's shabby streets, the mortal brothers and sisters of the dearly departed and the quickly forgotten. You are a leaf in a gale, blown by a force you can neither control nor resist. Sri Lankan visionary Arthur C. Clarke said 30 ghosts stand behind everyone alive, the ratio by which the dead outnumber the living. You look around you and fear the great man's estimate may have been conservative. Every person you see has a spirit crouching behind them. Some have guardians hovering above and swatting away the ghouls, the pretas, the rahu, and the demons. Some have the distinguished members of these latter groups standing before them, hissing idle thoughts into their faces. A few have devils squatting on their shoulders and filling their ears with bile. Sir Arthur has spent 3 decades of his life on these haunted shores and is clearly a Sri Lankan. Austria convinced the world that Hitler was German and Mozart was theirs. Surely, after centuries of armed plunder, courtesy of the pirates, the sea pirates from London, Amsterdam, and Lisbon, may we Sri Lankans at least help ourselves to one science fiction visionary? The rain spits out lightning, and the thunder breaks wind. You've lost count how many times it has rained since your untimely demise. Either the monsoons have come early, or the universe is shedding tears for you and your silly little life. Today, the tears fall as thick as globs of ink, diving from angry clouds onto the heads of the meek. Thank you.
When a book is written in a strife tone backdrop, against a strife tone backdrop, there is always a kind of, he's doing a catch-22, he's inspired by Joseph Heller and a whole lot of writers who are his contemporaries. So what is there are lots of references in this book to music, to the Arthur C. Clarke reference, to many cultural icons who were current in the late 80s and 90s. In fact, one big plot line depends on a king and a queen. So what cricket was to Chinamen, in many ways, all these cultural icons are to this book. So is that now becoming a Shehan trademark?
Well, I don't know. So we had Freddie Mercury, we had Elvis, we had Jim Reeves.
And then you mentioned Shakin' Stevens.
Shakin' Stevens, yeah. So Jim Reeves is not that big outside of the subcontinent. He's just another country star, whereas in the 60s and 70s, that was standard issue in every Sri Lankan household, Jim Reeves. I guess I like to include vinyl. I've started collecting it again. My CDs and my cassettes haven't got a shelf life, but vinyl does. And the idea that the negatives were hidden in these horrible albums by these great artists was something I couldn't resist. But yeah.
And what about the inspirations? You know, people keep saying there are tones of, as I said, Heller and other authors of that time. So would you say these are authors you grew up reading?
Well, Heller certainly, but I always pay homage to Uncle Kurt. Kurt Vonnegut, even, I mean, the first book, when I was looking for this curmudgeonly tone, one was Sri Lanka's Carl Muller, and the other one was Kurt Vonnegut. I mean, with Kurt Vonnegut, he's talking about, and I've read all his books apart from 2, and I'm savoring those, because the great man's no longer with us, and so maybe this decade I'll finish it all. But the ability that because he's talking about the complete meaninglessness of our existence and the fact that we're a bunch of barbarian monkeys who are destroying ourselves and destroying this planet. But it's not a grim, depressing story, and it's actually quite hilarious the way he writes. And other names would be Douglas Adams as well, talking about, the meaningless of existence and the pointlessness of Earth and everything that happens on it. George Saunders is another one, Margaret Atwood. Writers who are writing about grim topics, but their books aren't grim. Their books are actually quite fun and funny, but in the end, sad and depressing and moving. And so, these were, I guess, authors that I always gravitated towards. And this was the tone I don't know if I chose it or if it just came naturally, because when you're writing about 89, you can write a pretty somber, grim story if you're writing about any of the last 30 years. And I think choosing narrators to hide behind. So the Pradeep Matthews story, it was about this genius who never got appreciated, told by this old man who's drinking himself to death. But in that voice, I was able to find some sort of levity and humor in it. And I enjoyed spending time with W.G. Karunatilaka, and even though he had done nothing with his life and was drinking himself to death, he still saw the absurdity and the humor in the Sri Lankan situation. And I think same with Maali Almeida, who's going to these war zones and witnessing these horrible things, but he has this sardonic, dark sense of humor. And I think perhaps that's what kept me going, and that's what maybe keeps Sri Lankans going, because even anyone who's visited there knows that even though a lot of grim, horrible things have happened, it's not a grim, horrible place. It's quite a cheerful, and even when the cricket team is losing, we don't set fire to things or hurl stones at the pitch. We are sitting there with the papare band and dancing, and that seems to be a default mechanism. And even during the Aragalaya, the struggle that 2022, and now it seems to have turned out okay, but there's grim times ahead. But it was a terrifying time for most of us, because we thought this could easily turn out to another massacre. But I think what kept it going was on the street, the humor, on the internet, the memes and so on, the fact that we could mock these dictators, this regime that we feared. And so I think humor, it's one thing to say that it's a light device, but I think it's also a very powerful weapon to take the power away from the ruling class and so on. And so I think either we make jokes about each other or we start punching each other. So I think we've opted to make jokes about each other. I think that's the healthy way to process things.
At the bottom of this whole story, which is so elaborately, structured with its afterlife, there is a love story, and eventually that love story is something that really gains momentum as the book goes along. And there's this heady, youthful scene of the 90s, which you've recreated beautifully with the casinos and the crazy parties and the silly pills. So how much of it have you seen? You must have been rather young back then, so...
Yeah. Casinos don't look for ID as long as you were. Yeah.
You must have been dreadfully young back then.
No, I'm not as young as I look. I know. Yeah, I do remember the 90s quite well. And I do remember the fact that even though there was a terrible war happening, the Colombo bubble just carried on. And there were cricket matches, there were parties, and it almost was like, you see the death count on the front page, but you turn to the back page to look how the cricket team is going. And it seems that was Colombo's way of dealing with it. Even though we had bomb blasts and assassinations and checkpoints and curfews, but we didn't have the same harrowing experience that the people in Jaffna and Trincomalee and in the plantations experienced. And you see that even now. You see that December, if you went to Sri Lanka, middle of an economic power crisis, the city was lit up. People were partying, spending obscene money at restaurants and so on. And it seems that Colombo has a different way. We live in this bubble, and I lived there, and you experience this guilt, especially later in life when you talk to people who were in the war zones and who'd lost loved ones, and you realize, well, I just sat there. I mean, I didn't go to casinos. I'm a terrible gambler. A lot of this is,
Oh my God.
research. No, I'm a horrible. I haven't got a poker face, and but I spend a lot of time on YouTube watching how gamblers work and so on. But I think the difference between me and Maali Almeida is, I mean, I was a teenager in the 80s and in my 20s in the 90s, and I played in rock bands and watched TV and got on with life, whereas Maali Almeida left the comfort zone and went into these places and took photographs in the naive and idealistic hope that these photographs would stop the war. So just like Pradeep, I mean, I bowl left-arm Chinaman myself, but I bowled too many full tossers to be effective. So maybe like Pradeep Matthew was the bowler I could never be. Maali Almeida was someone who lived in a Colombo bubble, but who actually did something about it.
Gambler you could never be.
Yeah, I don't know if I have aspirations to be. I mean, I've written about the lotteries of life and all of that. I like watching gamblers, but it's hard work. You got to sit there doing mathematics while drinking and playing cards. But it made sense also. I mean, Richard de Soisa wasn't a gambler as far as I knew. But this made sense that why would this guy go to Jaffna and photograph these things when he could live quite comfortably in Colombo? But so one reason was he saw the universe as this. I mean, I think the opening absurdity is this guy's an atheist and a nihilist. He's gone to these places and he's convinced there can't be a God, there can't be a system to this universe. It's just random good or bad luck. It's the roll of the dice. Just like when I go into the casino and I put money on red or black, it's the same calculated risk that I'm taking. And then he's appalled to find out that when he dies, there is actually a system and he has to learn the rules. But the whole idea of him calculating odds, which is what we do every time we get in a car, get on a plane, where, I mean, maybe at a subconscious level, we're thinking of the odds of how we're maneuvering through life. And so this was an interesting conceit. Also, I mean, people have asked about him being a closet gay man and why, because that was the only detail that survived from Richard de Soysa's life. But that also, because you have to explain to yourself, why is this character doing these things? And you don't know it when you're starting out. But this made sense that in 1989, you couldn't come out in Sri Lanka, perhaps in most places in the world. And so therefore he could go to these conflict zones and express himself sexually. So and also he had daddy issues, and I think most of the characters have daddy issues in the books. And his dad said he'd never be good at anything, and he found this one thing he was good at, taking photographs. And so he thought he will use his skill to try and end wars. So I think, but the character evolves. I used to do these big character sketches before I start novels, and in the end you do the character sketches, you don't do the novels. With this I didn't have much going into it, but his character sort of revealed himself to me.
Yes, he lived and died by the camera. So I think this is a good point at which we can take a few questions. There's a gentleman in the front.
Loved the way the book was structured. When I finished it, I went back and read the quotes that you had for each of the phases of the moon. And even within the body, the modern sort of mini titles that you had, and sometimes you changed the font, and you had that in Chinaman as well. So I wanted to ask when and how that worked its way into the book we have now.
So again, we have to blame Uncle Kurt, because Kurt Vonnegut's books, I mean, or Breakfast of Champions, it has these little quirky little illustrations, short chapters, and so on. And so for Chinaman, I ripped that off, these cricket and so my brother, bless him, he does all the illustrations for me. And so the cricket diagrams and these little short chapters explaining cricketing terminology and explaining, Sri Lankan, the context and things like that. With this one, the Seven Moons was always, with a thriller or with a murder mystery, you have to have the ticking clock. So the Seven Moons was a convenient thing, but it also came from folklore, as you asked before. We have this belief, which I think is shared around the region, that we have an almsgiving after 7 days after the death, because the spirit's supposed to be wandering around, and after 7 days and after 3 months. So 7 moons and 90 moons. And I did the maths for that, and then the next moon, it follows the Fibonacci sequence. I geeked out on this stuff, and so therefore that's why it's so important for spirits to make their 7th moon, because if they miss the 7th moon, they have to wait for 3 months. If they miss that, I think it's 512 moons, and that's why you get either very ancient ghosts or very recent ghosts. So that took care of the structure. But I think also so with the first book, my brief to myself was, can I write a book about Sri Lanka that doesn't mention the war? Because most Sri Lankan books, the ethnic conflict is there. It's a Tamil girl, Sinhala boy, some ill-fated love affair. The war's always the backdrop. And I thought, can I write a book about 1996, the World Cup win, which doesn't matter, it's about 2 guys who drink arak and watch cricket. And of course the war is there and it makes its appearances. But so therefore these short chapters was also another way of just quickly dispensing with the details. And I think another edit was, so early on in 7 Moons, there's a cheat sheet.
Yeah, there's a cheat sheet, which is very...
And it was there in Chats with the Dead, and we were thinking of taking it out, but we thought, okay, this is going to be helpful just to, in a pithy 2 pages, explain who the main players and main players of the conflict were. So I think, I'd say Kurt Vonnegut, again, I have to lay credit, short chapters, illustrations, whatever it takes to get the reader to the next page. Yeah.
Any question? Yes, there's a lady there, which is so wonderful for my man-woman rule. Do you really believe in ghosts? She's asking. There's a mic there next to you.
And the follow-up question will be, you said you spoke to clairvoyants. So, again, do the ghosts exist?
Um, so I went to, the first year of research was me and a couple of friends. We got in a car and did road trips around Sri Lanka visiting haunted houses. And there's plenty of old colonial bungalows in the hills that are supposed to be haunted. Also around the coast where villages destroyed by the tsunami, there's ghost stories. And sociologists have and anthropologists have kind of written about this, the fact that wherever there is great trauma, there are ghost stories. And you can either interpret this that, the restless spirits are wandering around looking for resolution, or that it's a psychological phenomenon where if a village has lost a lot of their young people, they suddenly see apparitions in the forest. Like I say, I stayed in these places. They were quite creepy places, and sat there watching horror movies, waking up at 3 in the morning. I didn't see anything. But again, this is part of Sri Lankan folklore. You're either Yaksha, Gana, or Manussa. And if you're Yaksha, you can see spirits. If you're Gana, you can feel the presence. If you're Manusha, you don't. And I guess I belong to the third category. So yeah, I didn't see anything, but that doesn't mean they're not hovering around all of us now, especially in this old venue. I'm not, one thing I didn't do was a seance, because I've watched too many horror movies. We know how this turns out. Writer researching a ghost story does a seance, and we know what happens. So I didn't want to, so the answer to your question is, I haven't seen a ghost, I haven't experienced it, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna mess with the spirits around here, but yeah, I haven't seen one.
There's a hand right at the back. And then after that, the lady in front, I think, and then we can wind down. But Shehan has 2 other sessions. Can you just say the question? We can hear you.
Okay. Hello, sir. Dipan this side. I'm a huge admirer of your writing. I've read all of your books.
Have you read Where Shall I Poop? My masterpiece.
No.
No, you haven't read my kids' books. Okay.
Okay, I haven't yet heard of it. Okay. So only now I got to know of it. Thank you. My first question is, I found a kind of similarity between Dante's La Divina Commedia, the Divine Comedy, and this, because there's this Inferno and Purgatorio and Paradiso structure. So was that a conscious, I would say, impact on you while you were, inspiration for you while you were taking notes or preparing for this book, Seven Moons? And my next question, maybe you may not like it. You talked about Sri Lankan people being very humorous, making fun of dictators. How do you expect Indian readers to react to your book? I mean, we also are having our own dictators.
So the first question, certainly Dante's Inferno, you're writing a thing about the afterlife, so you go to the best sources. So yeah, I certainly did read Dante's Inferno. I took notes about the different, because I had to populate this world with different apparitions and ghosts and different sinners and so on. So yeah, that was certainly an influence among, other great works of the afterlife. Notably, Lincoln in the Bardo, which came out while I was struggling with this.
Yes, it reminded me of that.
And I was devastated that a talking ghost book had won the Booker. I thought, okay, there's no chance they're going to give 2 talking ghost books the Booker.
But yours was punctuated.
Yeah, but then, because there's also a tendency when you're writing something, you don't want to read books like it. But I'm the opposite. I want to read all the other books like it. And of course, I read George Saunders, and it's a masterpiece. And I actually was inspired by that. I thought, okay, this guy's working on a totally different realm. My book's nothing like it, but obviously this thing can be done, and an ambitious book can reach readers. So yeah, Dante's Inferno certainly was an influence. How would Indian readers react to, forget Indian readers, worldwide it seems the the bad guys are winning, right? It seems like we thought in the 20th century that fascism, totalitarianism, majoritarianism was done, and now we find out that that's the major force that's taking over, especially Asia and the rest of the world. I'm a bit skeptical about the whole Sri Lankan smile, the fact that we smile. Like the Sri Lankan smile is something that all our tourist brochures talk about, that we are such warm, hospitable people, which is true most of the times, but also the Sri Lankan smile is there when the waiter doesn't know what you ordered, they'll smile, or when the guy doesn't know where to take you. Like when people are confused, when they're angry, they will smile as a way of saving face. And I think also making jokes about this thing, it's a coping mechanism. But I also feel that now, and I wrote about this, that the jokers need to stop making jokes, and we need serious people with serious solutions to serious problems. I mean, India's got its tradition of jokers and making fun of dictators and so on, or making fun of the powers. I think it's a technique. I don't know if it's a technique that will ultimately work, because in the end the jokers get silenced and the punchline is the state gets the last laugh. That seems to be the sad situation. So I mean, I don't really have an answer to that, but like I say, I'd rather we laugh at each other rather than start punching each other. I think that's the best I can offer.
We are really running behind schedule, so I'll just take one very short and quick question and quick answer.
Hi, I have a very simple question. I'm an avid reader, but ever since I've read Seven Moons, I haven't been able to read anything. It's like I'm stuck. And
She's in
I'm in love with that
purgatory.
book. I can't move on. I can't move on. So has there been a book in your life that you've you know?
Oh, I'm sorry about that. That's a terrible thing. That's horrible.
No, I'm loving that phase right now.
I've had books that stopped me, Ulysses by James Joyce, that stopped me reading for a long time. Books that you loved so much that you don't want to read another. No, I haven't encountered that. There's so many great books in the world. You can find that. But please, pick up another book. There's plenty of great writers here. There's great bookshops here, and keep reading. No, I haven't. I have had books that have been so daunting that it stopped me reading for a while, but my solution is then just read something for fun. Yeah, I mean, my daughter's just starting to read, and yeah, she gets The Secret Garden and Charles Dickens and all that, but she loves reading the Wimpy Kids, and I think, yeah, you should read for pleasure and read the stuff you enjoy. So hopefully you can find another book. I'm sure you can. Yeah.
Yes, and there's always his next book of short stories you can start with. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we're really running late, and the other panel, I'm already apologizing in advance. Thank you, Shehan. We'll have more of Shehan later in the festival, and his books are available at the bookstore. You can sign them now or at one of his later sessions.